The one thing that composition students in freshman courses tend to struggle with the most is identifying what a scholarly source is and using them appropriately in their essays or papers. And so, even though I've provided several lessons on evaluating sources in prior weeks, I'm creating this fresh sort of reminder or refresher course on scholarly sources. Now that you've had an opportunity to write a couple of essays, or you're beginning to prepare to write some additional essays that require scholarly sources, just to try to reinforce how to go about identifying a truly scholarly source. So let me just give you some of the basics. I've covered this before, but this is going to be a condensed version. One of the things I see a lot with essays from freshman college students is they assume that if something either was found by Google Scholar or is in some way connected to a college or university, then it, by definition, is scholarly, and that is not the case. Generally speaking, that might get you to a credible source, which is a step below a scholarly source as far as we're concerned for these purposes. But to be a scholarly source, it must be written by a named scholar, at least one, usually, often more than one. So if there is not a name attached, you're done as far as determining whether it's a scholarly source. It's not. It may qualify as a credible source. Some of your essays, you can use a combination of credible sources, which is information that's solid, that will help you with your essay, but doesn't rise to the level of research-based, scholarly-based, academically sound sourcing. The second thing that a scholarly source must have is it must be peer-reviewed. In other words, other scholars have read and reviewed and ultimately approved the source, the paper or whatever you're using, and it must be referred to as a peer-reviewed source. So it appears in an academic journal, and it appears in a peer-reviewed journal. Now, the one exception to that might be that it was delivered in an academic conference. Now, just because a scholar stood up before other scholars and delivered a speech doesn't automatically make it a scholarly source, but in some cases, those kinds of presentations have been handed out early to other scholars for their review and feedback, and then it becomes a peer-reviewed presentation. If it doesn't say peer-reviewed somewhere in the journal that it appears in or in the paper somehow, don't use it as a scholarly source and keep looking. So for example, if I say in the assignment that you need 4 sources, 2 of which are credible and 2 of which are scholarly, they can all be scholarly because scholarly is the next level up, but you need to have at least 2 reach that highest level of academic standard. Credible sources can be a wider variety, although a lot of students misconstrue this as well. Just because something appears on a podcast or a website like history.com, I'll talk about this in a moment, but history.com is just a TV channel, and so it doesn't rise to the level of credibility. You don't use Wikipedia. So, but there are a lot of credible sources out there. There are websites that Stanford University has a great website going through the history and definitions of philosophy. That's a great credible source. it is not a scholarly source because those individual entries have not been peer reviewed, and so they're fine to use as a credible source but not as a scholarly source. If you have any questions at all about a source, either send me a note asking me specifically about it or don't use it. Another example of a credible source would be if you're gathering data from a government agency. That statistical data can be relied on. So that's the difference between these two, and a reminder about the level of scholarship required to be a scholarly source. Here are some of the mistakes or pitfalls I see all the time from students kind of mid-semester on using these sources. First of all, they will say to me, well, I used Google Scholar. Great. Google Scholar is just a search engine. It is a little better at finding scholarly sources than regular Google is, but it's not a guarantee. You've got to continue looking once you have found something through Google Scholar. Open the source up, read it. If it's a source you can't open, keep looking. There's a lesson I've provided you on using JSTOR through the College of Eastern Idaho. A lot of students don't do that because they're intimidated by it. It is not a difficult process. You can get in touch with the library or with the tutoring center and they can help you use that free source. A lot of students want to use Wikipedia. It is not either a credible or a scholarly source. However, if you read, and I've talked about this in a prior lesson, if you can go to Wikipedia, I do it all the time, go to the bottom, there are a lot of references. Sometimes those references have links that you can go to, and they might eventually take you to a credible or a scholarly source, but Wikipedia by itself cannot be cited. Please don't use podcasts, blogs, basic websites, TV channel websites like A&E or History.com. These are not credible sources for our purposes. Do not use them for these assignments. Most important, don't take a shortcut. Don't assume. Check out each of your sources one by one and determine to your satisfaction whether it meets either the credible or the higher scholarly level before you decide to use it. Don't get in a hurry and think just because it looks okay that it's going to be enough. I'm seeing this at this point in the semester way too often, and so it's important to take this to the next step, take the time, investigate it, that next step, open the document up, read it, make sure it meets all the requirements.